For decades, Pastor Jamal Bryant has stood before thousands, preaching hope, faith, and resilience. But behind the pulpit, behind the sermons and smiles, something few have ever seen or even imagined was quietly unfolding. A struggle with loneliness so deep that it shook the very foundation of his life. He's confided rarely about nights spent wrestling with isolation, moments when the weight of expectation felt unbearable, and the haunting question, who's really there for me when the congregation leaves? Tonight, we're uncovering the hidden side of a man known for his charisma and strength, the side that reveals vulnerability, heartbreak, and the personal battles that even a celebrated pastor cannot escape. What Jamal Bryant shared in private about his loneliness will shock you, and it might change the way you see faith, leadership, and the human heart forever. At first glance, Pastor Jamal Bryant's life seems like the picture of success. Powerful sermons, a thriving ministry, a presence that commands attention wherever he goes. But what most people don't see, what rarely makes headlines, is the personal struggle behind the public persona. In this video, we're diving deep into Jamal Bryant's revelations about his loneliness, the private battles that even his closest friends barely knew about, and the moments that shook him to his core. You won't believe the nights he spent wrestling with isolation, the personal doubts that even sermons couldn't resolve, and the rare confessions that reveal the man behind the ministry. We'll explore how fame, responsibility, and expectation can weigh on even the strongest individuals, and why Jamal's story resonates far beyond the pulpit. This isn't just a story about loneliness. It's about vulnerability, resilience, and the universal human struggle to find connection when life demands perfection. By the end of this video, you'll see Jamal Bryant in a completely new light, a man grappling with loneliness while inspiring thousands, and the lessons we can all learn from his candid truths. This is where it gets unbelievable. When you think of Pastor Jamal Bryant, the first images that come to mind are likely the stage, the pulpit, the crowd, and the energy that fills the room. He commands attention with every word, every gesture, every sermon. To the outside world, it seems effortless, a life of purpose, impact, and influence. But behind that public success lies a hidden reality, a life of private struggle that few people ever glimpse. Even at the height of his ministry, Jamal confided that the loneliness he felt was real, intense, and at times almost unbearable. It's a loneliness that doesn't come from a lack of people around you. On the contrary, he's constantly surrounded by congregants, staff, and supporters. But it's the kind of loneliness that comes from the pressure of responsibility, from being a pillar everyone depends on, from having to maintain an image of strength when your heart feels fragile. Jamal described the feeling of being alone in a room full of people. Even when celebrating achievements, even during powerful sermons, there were moments where he felt invisible, disconnected, and burdened by expectations he couldn't voice publicly. Nights were often the hardest. After the last person left the sanctuary, the applause faded, and the doors closed, silence became overwhelming. In those moments, he faced the weight of his own thoughts, doubts, and fears, the kind of internal struggle that can shake even the strongest leaders. What makes his story so compelling is not just the struggle itself, but the contradiction it represents. To many, he is a symbol of strength, charisma, and leadership. Yet privately, he wrestles with vulnerability that is rarely spoken about in the world of high-profile pastors. It's a reminder that human beings, no matter how powerful or revered, are not immune to loneliness, anxiety, or the need for connection. But what intensified this loneliness was not just the absence of companionship. It was the pressure to be perfect, to never falter, to always inspire, to continually lead without revealing the cracks beneath the surface. Jamal admitted that early in his ministry, he often ignored these feelings, believing that revealing vulnerability would be a sign of weakness. He carried his struggles silently, sometimes for months, until the emotional weight became almost impossible to bear. And then came moments that forced him to confront the truth: personal challenges, relationship strains, and moments of doubt made it clear that ignoring loneliness was no longer sustainable. Jamal realized that he had to face his isolation head-on, to seek understanding, support, and strategies to navigate this private battle while still leading publicly. But as we'll see in the next chapter, confronting loneliness wasn't a linear journey. It involved self-reflection, emotional reckoning, and moments that shook him to his core, moments that few would expect from a man whose life seems so full of purpose. Being a prominent pastor comes with privileges, influence, admiration, respect, but it also carries an invisible burden that many people don't see. For Jamal Bryant, the pressure to constantly appear strong, confident, and unwavering became a source of profound isolation. Every decision, every sermon, every public interaction carried the weight of scrutiny, not only from his congregation, but from the media, peers, and the broader community. Jamal often described feeling trapped in a paradox. He had thousands of people looking up to him, yet no one he could fully confide in. While many might assume that pastors have an innate support system, family, church staff, and friends, the reality is far more complicated. Trust becomes a delicate issue. People are drawn to you because of your influence and charisma, but how many are truly there for your emotional well-being? How many offer support without expectation? How many understand the pressure of being always on? He shared that even close relationships were affected. Friends and family, while loving and supportive, often couldn't fully grasp what it meant to live under a constant microscope. Every action, every word, every perceived misstep was magnified. And in a life where missteps can quickly become headlines, Jamal learned early that vulnerability came with risk. There were nights when he would lie awake, surrounded by comfort, yet feeling the weight of solitude pressing down. It wasn't simply being alone that haunted him, it was feeling unseen in a way that mattered. He had to project confidence, decisiveness, and wisdom, even when his own heart was heavy. In interviews, he admitted that these moments of loneliness were often accompanied by self-reflection, questioning not his faith, but his ability to carry the weight of so many expectations without breaking. Workshops, sermons, and community events provided temporary distraction, yet each day also reinforced a lingering emptiness. The constant cycle of giving, guiding, and inspiring left little room for him to process his own emotions. Even when surrounded by people, the experience of loneliness was palpable. It was an emotional exhaustion born from responsibility, a sense that he had to prioritize everyone else's needs over his own, often at the cost of his personal well-being. What made Jamal's struggle especially complex was the tension between faith and human vulnerability. He knew that as a spiritual leader, people expected him to be a pillar of strength. Yet internally, he grappled with feelings of inadequacy, doubt, and isolation that challenged that expectation. This duality, the public persona versus the private reality, created a silent battle that few could see or understand. And yet, there were moments of revelation. He realized that confronting this loneliness was not a sign of weakness, but an essential step toward authenticity and resilience. Acknowledging the struggle allowed him to begin searching for strategies to manage isolation, connect more deeply with himself and others, and ultimately reclaim a sense of personal peace. But as we'll uncover in the next chapter, this journey was far from easy. Jamal's attempts to address his loneliness revealed not just personal challenges, but also unexpected dynamics within his ministry, relationships, and the way the world perceived him. And some of the truths he confronted were both shocking and deeply moving, truths that few had ever heard him share publicly. For Pastor Jamal Bryant, the struggle with loneliness was never just an abstract feeling. It was deeply personal, tangible, and often overwhelming. Behind closed doors, away from the applause, the cameras, and the admiration, he faced battles that few could imagine. These were battles that tested not just his faith, but his emotional endurance, his sense of identity, and the very core of who he was. Jamal described moments where the world seemed heavy, even suffocating. Nights after ministry events, when the congregation had left and the echo of his own voice faded from the sanctuary, he would often sit in silence. The silence was not peaceful. It was a mirror reflecting every doubt, every fear, and every sense of isolation he had worked so hard to mask. The pulpit, the sermons, the public recognition, all of it could not fill the emptiness that weighed on him at those moments. These struggles were compounded by the expectations placed on him by others. People looked to Jamal for guidance, inspiration, and answers to their spiritual questions. They leaned on him during crises, celebrated his victories, and trusted him as a moral compass. But while he poured so much into others, he often felt he had nowhere to turn for himself. The role of a leader had a cost, and for Jamal, that cost was the quiet, persistent weight of loneliness. In private, he would sometimes question whether anyone truly understood him, not the public persona, not the famous pastor, but the man behind it all. He admitted that there were times when even those closest to him, family, friends, and church staff, could not fully comprehend the depth of his isolation. Their love and support were genuine, yet they could not bridge the gap between the expectations of leadership and the human need for authentic companionship. One of the most striking aspects of his struggle was the emotional toll it took on his mental health. Jamal recounted nights of restless thought where anxiety and doubt crept in despite his faith and training. Even a man who has preached about hope and perseverance could feel trapped by his own mind. Loneliness, he realized, is not simply being alone. It is being unseen, unheard, and emotionally distant, even when surrounded by people. Yet, amidst these struggles, Jamal also demonstrated extraordinary resilience. He began seeking ways to navigate his isolation. Journaling, prayer, and private reflection became lifelines. He started opening up cautiously to a few trusted confidants, learning that vulnerability did not make him weak, but human. It was in those rare moments of honesty that he began to experience connection, a reminder that even the strongest leaders need support. However, the journey was not straightforward. Each attempt to reconcile his public persona with his private struggles revealed more layers of complexity. There were moments of frustration, anger, and sadness. Moments when he felt the weight of expectation so heavily that even faith seemed insufficient to carry him through. But these moments also offered profound lessons about self-awareness, boundaries, and the importance of emotional authenticity. And just when it seemed he might find balance, Jamal encountered external pressures that threatened to amplify his sense of isolation. Public scrutiny, media speculation, and the inevitable comparison to other leaders added layers of stress that few could fathom. The loneliness was no longer only internal. It was magnified by a world that watched, judged, and expected him to remain unshakable. This chapter of his life reveals a side of Jamal Bryant that few have ever seen, a man who inspires thousands, yet fights private battles every day, a leader whose strength is undeniable, yet whose humanity is often hidden behind the spotlight. For Jamal Bryant, the realization that loneliness could no longer be ignored was both painful and transformative. After years of silently carrying the weight of expectations, of performing constantly for his congregation, peers, and the public, he reached a turning point. It wasn't a single moment, but rather a series of experiences that forced him to confront the depth of his isolation, the limitations of external validation, and the urgent need to reconnect with himself on a human level. One pivotal moment came during a routine evening at the church. After a particularly moving sermon, the applause and standing ovation from the congregation faded. Jamal remained on the stage alone in the sanctuary, the echo of the final "Amen" hanging in the air. In that silence, he felt the emptiness more acutely than ever. The validation of thousands could not replace the connection he craved, meaningful, honest, and reciprocal. He realized that he had been pouring himself into others without allowing himself the same care and compassion. Jamal began reflecting on the patterns that had led him here. He noticed how he often placed the needs of others above his own, striving to meet expectations without pause. He realized that his identity had become entwined with performance, the sermons, the appearances, the leadership, all a mask covering the vulnerability he rarely allowed himself to express. Loneliness, he came to understand, was not simply being physically alone, it was the absence of emotional intimacy and authentic connection in a life otherwise full of activity. The turning point also involved reaching out to trusted individuals. Jamal started opening up to a small circle of confidants, close friends, family members, and spiritual advisors about the challenges he had long kept hidden. These conversations were not easy. For a man whose role often demanded unwavering strength, admitting loneliness felt risky. Yet, as he spoke, he discovered relief, empathy, and guidance. He realized that vulnerability was not weakness, it was a path toward healing. In addition to personal conversations, Jamal began exploring reflective practices. Journaling, prayer, and quiet moments of meditation became essential tools. These practices allowed him to process complex emotions, confront doubts, and gradually rebuild his sense of self outside the public persona. He started to recognize that leadership does not require isolation, and that even those who inspire millions need genuine human connection to thrive. But the journey was not without setbacks. Even as Jamal worked to address his loneliness, public expectations continued to weigh heavily. Media scrutiny, congregation expectations, and the constant comparisons to other pastors created moments of anxiety and pressure. There were days when old feelings of isolation resurfaced, when the weight of being always on threatened to overwhelm him. Yet, each challenge became an opportunity for growth. Jamal learned to navigate these pressures with intention, setting boundaries, seeking support, and embracing authenticity. He realized that confronting loneliness was not a one-time event, but an ongoing practice, a commitment to honor his emotional health while fulfilling his leadership role. Perhaps the most powerful realization came when Jamal recognized the universality of his experience. His loneliness, once felt as a personal failing or burden, was reframed as a shared human condition. By acknowledging it publicly, he could inspire others to confront their own struggles, break stigmas surrounding mental health, and embrace vulnerability as a strength rather than a weakness. This chapter of Jamal Bryant's life marks a profound transformation, from silent struggle to courageous acknowledgement, from isolation to intentional connection, and from hidden vulnerability to authentic leadership. As Jamal Bryant continued confronting his loneliness, he entered a period of profound emotional reckoning. This wasn't just about addressing fleeting feelings of isolation. It was about understanding the roots of his vulnerability and transforming them into lessons that could guide both his personal life and his ministry. For a man constantly in the public eye, this was uncharted territory. Jamal reflected on how early life experiences shaped his approach to connection. Growing up in environments that demanded resilience and self-reliance, he learned to be strong, to perform, and to hide internal struggles. That mindset, while helpful in some contexts, also created barriers. It made him hesitant to show vulnerability, even to those closest to him. He realized that decades of prioritizing strength over emotional honesty had contributed to the deep sense of isolation he felt as an adult. The emotional reckoning involved facing painful truths. Jamal admitted that, at times, he had used work, ministry, and public engagement as distractions from loneliness. His dedication, while inspiring, had often prevented him from building deeper personal connections. Friendships remained surface level, and even romantic relationships were complicated by the weight of expectation and the fear of exposing emotional weakness. This candid reflection was difficult but necessary. One of the most striking revelations came when Jamal recognized that leadership does not require perfection. For years, he had equated authority with emotional invulnerability, believing that showing struggle would diminish his credibility. But the loneliness he experienced taught him that authenticity, honesty, and vulnerability could be powerful tools for connection. By allowing himself to be human, he could better empathize with the struggles of others and provide meaningful guidance beyond sermons. This period also highlighted the importance of intentional support systems. Jamal began prioritizing relationships that nurtured rather than drained him, seeking connections with people who offered genuine understanding and encouragement. He learned to communicate his needs openly and to accept help without guilt, a practice that many might find surprisingly difficult, especially for someone in his position. The impact of this journey on his ministry was profound. Congregants and followers began to notice subtle shifts in his approach. Sermons, once focused solely on spiritual instruction, began incorporating lessons on mental health, vulnerability, and the human experience. By sharing his own struggles, carefully and intentionally, Jamal created space for dialogue, empathy, and healing among his community. Yet the process was not without emotional turbulence. There were moments of doubt, guilt, and fear that opening up publicly might be misinterpreted or criticized. The media, always eager for headlines, could potentially frame vulnerability as weakness. But Jamal persisted, understanding that his story could inspire others to confront their own hidden battles, offering hope to those who silently suffer in loneliness. Perhaps the most poignant lesson was understanding that loneliness does not discriminate. It affects everyone, regardless of status, influence, or faith. By confronting his own isolation, Jamal learned that it is not a sign of failure, but a call to deeper self-awareness, emotional courage, and meaningful connection. This chapter of his journey is a testament to resilience. From private pain to public insight, Jamal Bryant transformed loneliness from a source of struggle into a source of strength. He demonstrated that true leadership involves embracing one's humanity and that the courage to confront inner battles can create ripples of hope for countless others. But even as he made progress, the path ahead remained delicate, maintaining authenticity while leading publicly, balancing personal healing with ministerial responsibility, and navigating relationships with honesty. All these challenges would continue to shape the next phase of his journey.